Welcome to the Sleepcast. For this episode, we will roll into the harbour. In the misty coastal town of Bainbridge Bay, elderly clockmaker Theodore Whitmore has spent 5 lonely years tending to his shop full of ticking timepieces, speaking only to his clocks since his wife's passing. When 8-year-old Emma Chen arrives with her grandmother's broken pocket watch, she brings more than just a repair job. She brings a gift of friendship and reminds Theodore that time is meant to be shared. Through warm dinners, quiet conversations, and a magical winter solstice festival, Theodore discovers that the most precious moments aren't measured by his carefully maintained clocks, but by the connections we make with the people who fill our days with meaning. And now, here is the Clockmaker of Bainbridge Bay in its entirety. The morning mist rolled in from the harbour like a gentle blanket, wrapping the cobblestone streets of Bainbridge Bay in soft grey silence. In the narrow shop at the corner of Harbour Lane and Seahorse Street, Theodore Whitmore carefully wound the last of his grandfather clocks, listening to their synchronized chorus of ticks and chimes that had become the heartbeat of his quiet world. Theodore had inherited the shop from his father, who had inherited it from his father before him. 3 generations of Whitmores had kept time for the people of Bainbridge Bay, and Theodore took this responsibility as seriously as the lighthouse keeper took his duty to guide ships safely to shore. The shop itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of countless timepieces. Pocket watches nestled in velvet-lined cases. Cuckoo clocks hanging from exposed wooden beams. And delicate mantel clocks arranged on shelves like sleeping cats. At 62, Theodore had grown into the role of the town's timekeeper as naturally as the tide follows the moon. His silver hair was always neatly combed, his wire-rimmed spectacles perpetually balanced on the bridge of his nose, and his hands, those careful, practiced hands, moved with the precision of the clockwork he tended. The townspeople often said that Theodore himself seemed to run on clockwork. So regular were his habits, and so dependable his presence. Each morning at precisely 7 o'clock, Theodore would unlock his shop door and flip the wooden sign from closed to open. He would then spend the first hour of each day winding his clocks, checking their mechanisms, and listening to their various voices. Some ticked boldly, others whispered, and a few, his favourites, seemed to hum soft lullabies that reminded him of his late wife Margaret, who used to fall asleep to the sound of the shop's timepieces. Margaret had passed 5 years ago, and since then, Theodore's world had grown smaller, but somehow more concentrated, like tea that has steeped too long. His routine became his anchor, and the clocks his companions. He spoke to them sometimes, especially on quiet afternoons when the fog rolled in thick and the townspeople stayed indoors by their fires. It was on such an afternoon in late September that young Emma Chen first pushed open the shop door, setting off the melodious chime that announced visitors. She was perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair that seemed to have a mind of its own and eyes wide with curiosity. Her small hands were pressed against the glass cases as she stared in wonder at the collection of pocket watches. "Can I help you, dear?" Theodore asked, looking up from the anniversary clock he was adjusting. Emma turned to him with the serious expression that children wear when they're trying to be grown up. "My grandmother's clock stopped working," she said, producing a small, tarnished pocket watch from her coat pocket. "She said you might be able to fix it." Theodore set down his tools and extended his hand. Emma placed the watch in his palm, and he could feel the weight of memory in it, the way metal holds the warmth of countless touches. the slight wear on the chain where fingers had worried it during anxious moments. "This is a beautiful piece," Theodore said, examining it through his jeweller's loupe. "It's quite old. Tell me about your grandmother." Emma's eyes lit up. "Her name is Lily Chen. She came here from China when she was young, and she says this watch belonged to her father. It stopped working last week, and she's been really sad about it. She says it's like losing his voice all over again." Theodore nodded, understanding the weight of such loss. Objects, especially timepieces, had a way of holding on to the people who had loved them. "I think I can help," he said gently. "But it might take a few days. The mechanism is delicate, and I'll need to clean it very carefully." "How much will it cost?" Emma asked, pulling a small purse from her pocket. "Let's see what we can work out," Theodore said, touched by her determination. "Perhaps you could help me in the shop after school while I work on it. I could use an assistant." And so began an unlikely friendship. Emma would arrive each afternoon at 3:30 when the school day ended, and Theodore would give her small tasks, dusting the lower shelves, sorting screws by size, or simply sitting quietly while he worked, asking questions about how clocks functioned and why time mattered so much to people. "Time isn't really something you can hold," Theodore explained one afternoon, as he carefully cleaned the gears of Emma's grandmother's watch. "It's more like water. It flows around us and through us, and we can only try to measure it, never truly capture it." "Then why do we try?" Emma asked, perched on a tall stool beside his workbench. Theodore paused in his work, considering the question. "I think because time connects us to the people we love. When we share moments with them, we're sharing time itself. And when they're gone, objects like this watch help us remember that shared time." Emma nodded solemnly, and Theodore was struck by how naturally children understood profound truths that adults often forgot. As the days passed, Theodore found himself looking forward to Emma's visits. The shop, which had grown so quiet since Margaret's passing, filled again with conversation and gentle laughter. Emma's questions challenged him to think about his craft in new ways, and her presence reminded him of the joy he'd once found in teaching Margaret about clockwork when they were first married. And meanwhile, word of Emma's afternoon visits began to spread through Bainbridge Bay. The townspeople had noticed Theodore's increasing isolation over the past few years, and they were pleased to see the clockmaker's shop showing signs of life again. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the bakery next door, began leaving extra cookies on Theodore's counter. Mr. Hoffman, the postal worker, lingered a bit longer during his deliveries to chat about the weather and the latest news from the harbour. One particularly grey afternoon in October, as Theodore put the finishing touches on the restored pocket watch, Emma arrived at the shop, accompanied by an elderly Chinese woman whose face was lined with the kind of wisdom that comes from having lived fully. "Mr. Whitmore," Emma said with excitement, "this is my grandmother, Lily." Lily Chen stepped forward with graceful dignity, her dark eyes warm but appraising. "Emma tells me you've been very kind to her," she said, her voice carrying only the slightest accent. "I wanted to thank you personally." Theodore stood and bowed slightly, a gesture of respect he'd learned from his grandfather. "Emma has been wonderful company. She's helped me remember why I love this work." "She said you fixed my father's watch," Lily continued, and Theodore could hear the emotion she was holding back. "I did my best," Theodore said, producing the gleaming pocket watch from his workbench. The tarnish had been carefully removed, and the face now shone with renewed clarity. Most importantly, it ticked with strong, steady rhythm. Lily took the watch with trembling hands and held it to her ear. Her eyes closed, and for a moment, Theodore saw her as she must have been decades ago. A young woman holding her father's watch for the first time, memorizing the sound of its heartbeat. "Perfect," she whispered, then looked up at Theodore with tears in her eyes. "How much do I owe you?" "Emma worked for it," Theodore said firmly. "She earned this repair with her help and her company." Lily studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Would you and Emma like to join me for dinner tonight? I make the best dumplings in Bainbridge Bay, and it seems I owe you both a proper thank you." That evening, Theodore found himself sitting at Lily's kitchen table, watching her teach Emma how to fold dumpling wrappers while she told stories of her childhood in China and her journey to America. The kitchen was warm and filled with wonderful smells, and Theodore realized he hadn't shared a home-cooked meal with friends in years. "My father was a scholar," Lily explained as she worked. "He wasn't wealthy, but he saved for months to buy that pocket watch because he said time was the most valuable thing anyone could own. He used to tell me that every second was a gift, and we should spend it wisely." "Wise man," Theodore said, accepting a cup of jasmine tea. "I've spent my whole life around timepieces, but I think I sometimes forget to actually live in the time they measure." Lily nodded. "We all do. That's why we need reminders." She gestured to Emma, who was concentrating intently on her dumpling folding technique. "Children are good at reminding us to be present." As the weeks passed, the dinner invitations became a regular occurrence. Sometimes Theodore would cook simple meals in his apartment above the shop, and sometimes they would gather at Lily's house. Emma would do her homework at Theodore's workbench while he repaired clocks, and Lily would stop by with tea and conversation. The first snow of winter arrived in early December, dusting Bainbridge Bay with pristine, white silence. Theodore was working on a particularly challenging repair, a 19th century French carriage clock with a complex striking mechanism, when Emma burst through the shop door with unusual excitement. "Mr. Whitmore, the harbour is freezing. There are little pieces of ice floating like glass. And Grandmother says there's going to be a festival for the winter solstice." Theodore looked up from his work, smiling at Emma's enthusiasm. "A festival?" "The whole town is going to gather at the harbour on the longest night," Emma explained breathlessly. "Everyone's going to bring lanterns and hot chocolate, and we're going to watch the lighthouse beam sweep over the ice. Grandmother says it's to celebrate the return of longer days." Theodore felt a familiar tug of resistance. He hadn't attended community gatherings since Margaret's funeral. The thought of crowds and conversation felt overwhelming after years of solitude. "That sounds lovely," he said carefully. "But I should probably stay here and work on this clock." Emma's face fell slightly. "But you have to come. Grandmother is making special lanterns, and she says the festival won't be the same without the town's timekeeper." Before Theodore could respond, the shop door chimed again, and Lily entered carrying a tray of steaming cups. "I thought you might like some hot cider," she said, then noticed Emma's disappointed expression. "What's wrong?" "Mr. Whitmore says he's too busy to come to the solstice festival," Emma said, trying to hide her sadness. Lily set down the tray and looked at Theodore with understanding eyes. Ah, she said quietly. Sometimes we build walls around ourselves, thinking they'll keep the hurt out, but they also keep the joy out. Theodore removed his spectacles and cleaned them unnecessarily, a habit when he felt uncomfortable. I'm just not much for crowds these days. Neither am I, Lily said, settling into the chair beside Emma. But I've learned that loneliness is heavier than the effort it takes to connect with people. And besides, she added with a gentle smile, Emma has been looking forward to showing you her lantern. Emma perked up. It's shaped like a clock, with little lights where the numbers would be. Theodore found himself smiling despite his reservations. A clock lantern? Grandmother helped me make it, Emma said proudly. She said time is something we share, so it made sense to make a lantern that celebrates time. Theodore was quiet for a moment, considering. The old French clock on his workbench ticked steadily, and he could hear the distant sound of the harbour bell marking the changing of the tide. Time, he realised, was indeed something to be shared. Well, he said finally, I suppose I could take a break from this repair. The clock has waited a century for restoration. It can wait one more evening. Emma's face lit up like a lantern itself, and Lily smiled with satisfaction. The night of the winter solstice was clear and cold, with stars scattered across the sky like scattered jewels. Theodore walked down to the harbour bundled in his warmest coat, carrying a thermos of hot chocolate and feeling nervous but oddly excited. He hadn't realised how much he'd missed being part of something larger than himself. The harbour was transformed. Dozens of handmade lanterns bobbed on strings and poles, creating a warm constellation of light along the waterfront. Families clustered together, their breath visible in small clouds, and children ran between the groups with the boundless energy that defies winter cold. Theodore spotted Emma immediately. Her clock lantern was unmistakable, with 12 bright points of light marking the hours, and a larger light in the centre like a golden sun. She was standing with Lily near the water's edge, both of them wrapped in colourful scarves. Mr. Whitmore, Emma called, running toward him. You came. Look at all the lanterns. Indeed, the variety was remarkable. There were lanterns shaped like ships and fish, stars and flowers, and even one that looked remarkably like the lighthouse itself. Each one seemed to represent something meaningful to its creator. Your clock lantern is beautiful, Theodore said, admiring the craftsmanship. Did you make the light mechanism yourself? Grandmother helped, Emma admitted, but I did the wiring. She showed me how circuits work, kind of like how you showed me how clock springs work. As the evening progressed, Theodore found himself drawn into conversations with neighbours he hadn't spoken to in years. Mrs. Patterson told him about her granddaughter's wedding plans. Mr. Hoffman shared stories from his recent retirement travels. The harbour master, Captain Rodriguez, discussed the unusual winter weather patterns and how they might affect the spring fishing season. But it was during the moment when everyone fell silent to watch the lighthouse beam sweep across the ice-covered harbour that Theodore felt something shift inside him. The beam moved in its steady, predictable pattern, a reliable rhythm that had guided ships safely home for over 100 years. It struck him that he too had been a kind of lighthouse for the town, keeping time steady and reliable for anyone who needed it. Beautiful, isn't it? Lily said softly, standing beside him as they watched the light paint silvery paths across the frozen water. It is, Theodore agreed. I'd forgotten how peaceful it can be to share silence with others. Shared silence is different from solitude, Lily observed. Both have their place, but shared silence connects us even when we're not speaking. As the official part of the festival began to wind down, Emma tugged on Theodore's coat sleeve. Mr. Whitmore, would you tell everyone about time? About why it matters? Theodore felt a moment of panic. Oh, I don't know about that, Emma. I'm not much of a public speaker. But Captain Rodriguez had overheard. That's a wonderful idea. Come on, Theodore. You've been keeping time for this town for decades. Share some of that wisdom with us. Before Theodore quite knew what was happening, he found himself standing in the center of the gathered townspeople, their lanterns creating a warm circle of light around him. He looked at all the familiar faces, people whose clocks he'd repaired, whose watches he'd cleaned, whose timepieces had marked their important moments. I'm not sure I have any great wisdom about time, he began, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. But I've spent my life listening to it, and I think I've learned a few things. He paused, looking at Emma's encouraging smile and Lily's nodding approval. Time isn't really about the clocks and watches, he continued. Those are just tools to help us organize our days. Real time is about the moments we share with each other. It's about the rhythm of our lives together, the way we mark seasons and celebrations, the way we show up for each other during difficult times, the way we create memories that last long after the clock hands have moved on. Theodore gestured to the lanterns surrounding them. Tonight, we're all sharing the same moment, the turning of the year toward longer days and the promise of spring. We're creating a memory together, and that's what time really is. It's not something we can hold on to, but it's something we can share. The crowd was quiet for a moment, and Theodore worried he'd said too much, or not enough. Then someone began to clap, and soon everyone was applauding, not just for his words, but for the moment itself, for the sense of community and connection that had been created in that circle of lantern light. As the festival crowd began to disperse, families heading home with sleepy children and glowing lanterns, Theodore found himself walking slowly back to his shop with Emma and Lily. The streets were quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than the solitude he'd grown accustomed to. Thank you, he said to them both, for inviting me, for reminding me that time is meant to be shared. Thank you for coming, Lily replied, and for fixing my father's watch. It's been ticking perfectly. Can I still come help in the shop? Emma asked, concern in her voice. Even though the watch is fixed? Theodore smiled. Of course. I could use a permanent assistant. And besides, there are always more clocks that need attention. As they reached the corner where their paths diverged, Theodore made a decision that surprised even him. Would you both like to come for dinner tomorrow? I make a decent fish stew, and I have some stories about the history of timekeeping that Emma might enjoy. Both Emma and Lily smiled. We'd love to, Lily said. Theodore unlocked his shop door and climbed the stairs to his apartment. But before settling in for the night, he wound all his clocks with extra care. As their synchronized ticking filled the space around him, he no longer heard it as mere mechanical sound. Instead, he heard it as a gentle reminder that time was indeed a gift, and the best way to honor that gift was to share it with others. The winter passed gently after that. Theodore's shop became a gathering place where Emma did her homework. Lily stopped by for afternoon tea, and various townspeople found excuses to visit. The old clockmaker discovered that his years of solitude had prepared him to be a better friend. He'd learned to listen carefully, to appreciate small moments, and to understand that every person, like every timepiece, had their own unique rhythm. When spring arrived and the harbour ice began to break up with musical tinkling sounds, Theodore realized that he had learned the most important lesson of his long career as a timekeeper. The best way to spend time was in the company of people who made each moment meaningful. And so the clocks of Bainbridge Bay continued to tick their steady rhythms. But now, they marked time that was truly shared. Time filled with friendship, conversation, and the quiet joy of a community that had rediscovered its heart in the workshop of a gentle clockmaker who had learned that even the most carefully maintained timepiece means nothing without people to share the moments it measures.